Chapter 8, The Plateau. Becoming 80 is a boon and a blessing to a man who spent his middle age in a fever of activity, like a wasp trying to fly through a window screen. I accepted all invitations, lecture tours, orchestra concerts, the Saturday show, the daily writer's almanac, book contracts, newspaper columns. I did everything except weddings, baptisms, and funerals. 80 came as a huge relief. It was a plateau from which you look back and see your life in perspective, a great luxury to observe the calamitous confusions of ambition, the hundreds of airport terminals and backstages, the auditoriums where I listened to an unctuous introduction like Caro syrup poured on Wonder Bread, and realized he was talking about me, the holidays when leisure was misery, the misbegotten romances. What did I see in her? I was pleased by what she seemed to see in me. The sale of that house I loved on Goodrich Avenue with the screened front porch, but also the impulsive moves that turned out well, like the dozen ocean cruises, and all the music and dancing and outright fun, and the video essay I once did for CBS TV, which was covering the NCAA basketball tournament that year, which I concluded by tossing a ball over my right shoulder without looking and hitting a swisher from the free throw line, which impressed a number of people. And the expensive trip, New York to Southampton aboard the Queen Mary II to celebrate my turning 70. And for 10 years now, I have put myself to sleep at night by standing at the rail as the ship slips across the New York harbor, past Miss Liberty and under the Verrazano Bridge and out to sea toward England. Thousands of nights of sleep for the purchase of an ocean passage. A bargain. I grew up sanctified brethren and listened to preachers talk about the imminence of death and iceberg waiting to sink our ship. So how did I get into the comedy trade? Fundamentalism is not fun, just as California is not about cauliflower, nor Virginia about virginity. Occasionally I hear someone use the word beseech or vouchsafe or propitiation, and I know I'm in the company of another evangelical, and I want to throw my arms around him and commiserate. We never sang up-tempo, only dirges. Women kept silent in church because the sound of their voices would lead men to think impure thoughts. We didn't dance because it could lead to fornication. My family sat around the dinner table and said very little because we were evangelicals and believed that every word that comes out of your mouth should be to the glory of the Lord, which is a very high standard indeed, so we sat in silence wondering what God wanted us to say. Surely not jokes. But I got a taste of comedy at dinner when Dad thanked God for his goodness and mercy and the death of our Savior. I put a couple peas on my spoon or a pat of potato and flipped it at my good sister, whose eyes were closed during prayer, and after the amen she found food on herself, and she glared at me accusingly, but Mother never reprimanded me, and surely that was because she'd done something similar in her childhood. Comedy and reverence are not incompatible. Reverence bestows the liberty to be playful. We are not guilty criminals awaiting the gallows. We are children of God. Our Creator loves us, and with joy in our hearts, we flip peas at the righteous. We spent a good deal of time, perhaps too much, in the book of Revelation with the tribulation, the pit of scorpions, the sea turning to blood, the Antichrist, Armageddon, people in such pain that they chewed their tongues off. And then, of course, the judgment, but Scripture also says, quote, "Seek and ye shall find. Knock and it shall be opened unto you," end of quote. And what you find, whether you seek it or not, is that when you grow up in a dark religious cult, once you're freed from it, you become very happy. Pure, unadulterated, blind luck is my secret, which is not the same thing as privilege. Privilege is having a chauffeur, and luck is when the train arrives just as you come through the turnstile, and it stops, doors open, and you board without missing a step. And now your entire day up to that point feels perfectly timed and you feel blessed. Having a chauffeur just makes you feel sheepish. Good luck. 10 years old, playing softball, I dropped an easy pop-up on the playground, looked up, there it was, then it bounced off my forehead. And kids laughed and jeered, especially the Durbans, the bullies of the school, 3 skinny boys, mouth breathers with small feral eyes, who liked to jump a kid and knock him down and punch the cookies out of him. I passed their house every morning on my way to school, and their dog chased me, and they yelled at me all the terrible things they planned to do, and I dreaded them. I asked Mrs. Molenbrock to let me spend recess in the school library, and she said yes, and it changed my life. I read like crazy that year. Read Black Beauty, Little Breeches, A Christmas Carol, The Three Musketeers, Penrod, Huckleberry Finn, Kidnapped, Robinson Crusoe, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and Pilgrim's Progress, one after the other. I fell behind in math, didn't understand multiplicity or divisiveness or fractionalism, but she told me I was her brightest pupil, and it lit up my life. Had I caught the ball, I might have become a popular boy, succeeded in college and gone to law school, an articulate, self-assured man, gotten elected to the Senate, run for president as a Republican in 2000, and beaten Al Gore, but in the flush of success, I would have not noticed the ticking time bomb of my mitral valve and would have collapsed on the hustings, a tall man falling, clutching his chest, making a quacking sound. And instead of that, thanks to the drop ball, I had become this reclusive guy on the radio who spends his twilight years enjoying his good fortune. From the dropped pop-up on, instead of competing with my peers as a smart child would, I sought the approval of teachers and elders. I was a kid trying to impersonate a man of 45. Other kids called me professor. I had no desire to be most popular boy. I wanted to be class genius. I joined no teams, no clubs. I was a loner. I sat in a luncheon room with other loners. I enjoyed hoeing corn and mowing the lawn, working in straight lines, which naturally leads to writing. And weeding is a form of editing. So I gravitated to a nest under the stairs where I read books and did some writing in a spiral notebook. I enjoyed hoeing corn and mowing the lawn, working in straight lines, which naturally leads to writing, and weeding is a form of editing. So I gravitated to a nest under the stairs where I read books and did some writing in a spiral notebook. Other kids joined 4-H, where working side by side with others, you learned cooperation and how to get along in a group and gained valuable social skills. I did not. I was briefly a Boy Scout, but the uniform was embarrassing since I had no merit badges on mine and other boys did as they rose through the ranks. I did not rise. Thanks to separatist brethren teaching, being a loner felt righteous. I became the only boy in my school who wrote poetry. The Durbans didn't know poetry from pottery. I wrote, "Let me remember this October day. Night falls, the moon appears, the Milky Way. The butterfly knows he will die in a day or an hour, but lands on the flower, inserts his connector, and drinks the nectar. I eat a golden apple and sit in the grass, my dog's nose in my hand." I was a reader who kept trying my hand at writing, hoping something would come out of it eventually, and was mostly oblivious to the opinions of others. My mother talked to her sister Elsie every day. It was her lifeline. My confidants were dead authors. I was dedicated to writing, one thing I could do without asking for help. My father built the house I grew up in, dug the basement, poured concrete, raised the walls, did the plumbing, planted a lawn and garden. And I could have learned a lot from him, but I did not pay attention. He was a giant of competence, and I was fearful of making a mistake, so I absented myself. My brother Philip watched closely and became an engineer. I was my mother's son, she who loved Fibber McGee and his wife Molly of 79 Wistful Vista, and their neighbor Throckmorton P. Gildersleeve and Wallace Wimple. She turned up the radio and laughed at all the stock punchlines. I enjoyed hearing my mother laugh. She who worked so hard making a life for her family. I don't know anybody who worked harder than Grace Keeler, and it was a beautiful thing to hear her laugh. That summer I turned 11, my grandpa Denham died, and I was allowed to attend the funeral. My only previous encounter with death was staring at the Egyptian mummy in the Minneapolis Public Library. His funeral, seeing the tears of my aunts, the stolid faces of his sons George and Jim and Bill, was a high point amid the crushing boredom of that summer, mostly spent sitting on the riverbank, hurling rocks at sticks floating along. Too old to play cowboys, too young for softball. That summer, my mother made my dad take me with him when he drove a car to New York as a favor to a neighbor whose husband was an army captain stationed in Germany and had arranged for it to be shipped to him. Dad had been stationed in New York during the war and still had friends there. Mother didn't think the father of 6 children should be gallivanting around alone in Manhattan. So off we went. I was his ball and chain. It was the trip of all trips, the 2-lane highways through Indiana and Ohio, the country inn in Pennsylvania with the high-poster bed, Valley Forge, the whine of traffic and the Lincoln Tunnel, the towers of Manhattan silvery in the afternoon sun, streets jammed with pushcart peddlers shouting in strange languages. I was knocked out by New York, and I had my father all to myself for 2 weeks for the one and only time in my life. Once in Times Square, I wandered away from him, and it scared him, the thought that I might get lost, and he ran and grabbed my hand, and I remember this, knowing that my dad loved me. He'd never say it, of course, but he did. Dad told me he had been an army postal clerk, and people on the street looked at his uniform and treated him like a hero, and restaurants served him dinner, no charge, and the theaters let him in for free. He had admitted this freely, though brethren were supposed to shun theaters. The Lord was sufficient for us. We didn't need chorus girls and razzmatazz. A great discovery for me that my father had broken a rule, and also that some people had died in battle and others had had a wonderful time in uniform. But the real discovery was when I came home, that I was the only student in Benson School who'd seen New York, the one and only. It was a gigantic rise in stature. I'd been bullied at school before. Kids would hold the chair for me to sit down on and then pull it away so I crashed to the floor with macaroni and cheese all over me. They'd tie my shoelaces together, they'd throw water at me so it looked like I wet my pants, gave me the cruel nickname Fox Fart, but no more. Now I was the 6th grade sophisticate who stood up in front of the school and talked about the Bronx and the Battery, the people riding in a hole in the ground, Coney Island and the waves of the Atlantic crashing in, and going to see the Dodgers and standing on the 86th floor of the Empire State. I felt the advantage of having good material. Were you scared? They asked. Did you see criminals? Were there a lot of Negroes? Yes, I said. There were Negroes, and I talked to them, and they talked to me. The Durbans accused me of lying, but nobody listened to them, and they slunk away in defeat. I told about the heat wave in New York when Dad and I slept on a fire escape 6 stories up, and one night we spread a sheet in a park and slept on the grass along with hundreds of others. Weren't you scared? No, I was asleep. How could you sleep with all those people you didn't even know? I felt safe with them around. I just closed my eyes and went to sleep.